everyone. Today we will be presenting on Trusting the Construction of Results, a micro study on methods representation in technical communication scholarship. My name is Christina Costa, and I am presenting with Manny Pina and Jessica Weber. So, our micro study seeks to answer two main questions. The first is, how are research methods represented in published research, and what are the functions of method sections? Previous research has already answered these questions as they relate to the representation of methods in graduate dissertation research. However, to date, no study within the field of technical communication has provided a comprehensive survey of how method sections operate in published research. Our study seeks to provide a counterbalance to the available research on the representation of methods in dissertations.
So, as Christine said, our engagement, or our interest rather, in the representation of methods in research grew out of our engagement with uh, two articles. Kate Pantelotti's 2007's article, Graduate Students Show Their Work, Meta-Language and Dissertation Methodology Sections. And in this article, she describes how method sections work in dissertation work. And she identifies three main moves and functions that the method section serves in dissertation work. It serves as proof of the learning process. Method sections also function as a performance of genre expectations, and they are places of reflections for a student to actually engage in the learning process that takes the place of explicit writing instruction in the graduate curriculum. And so we wanted to replicate her work by not just looking at graduate dissertations, but we also wanted to extend it to answer the call that Peter Smagorinsky issued in 2008 in his article, The Method Section as the Conceptual Epicenter in Constructing Social Science Research Reports. And in this article, Smagorinsky laments that too often method sections are an afterthought rather than a driving force in research. And Smagorinsky's primary claim is that method sections are vital to published research because they show how data becomes results. And in order to actually trust the results that authors are making, or that the authors are constructing through their research, we first need to have a direct line to the research or to the data they collected, and also to how they analyze that data and what they did with it to get to those results. So these are the two articles that really served as our foundations for thinking about this project. And in the next slide, I'll show you how recent research by Kirk Saint-Amant and Lisa Melancont, they started to answer this question that Peter Smagorinsky issued. And their article was Empirical Research in Technical and Professional Communication, a 5-year examination of research methods and a call for research sustainability. And in this article, Melancont and Saint-Amant really looked at the past 5 years of research within technical writing and professional writing, and they looked at the types of research that are being done. And here we can see that they were able to identify that researchers in technical communication and professional communication were using solid research strategies like surveys, interviews, usability testing. But as productive and informational as Melancont and Saint-Amant's work is, they didn't fully answer Peter Smagorinsky's call about how do we develop trust in the construction of results. So Melancont and Saint-Amant serve as a good starting place, and we wanted to extend the conversation that they began in their article by focusing on not only how our methods represented, but also the functions that those methods serve when in published research.
So I'm going to get into a little bit of the methods that we used. So we started off with a first round of coding where we chose our corpus first, so the 3 prestigious journals in the field with practitioner and academic audiences. And we highlighted any mention of methods. So we were able to split up the articles that we were taking a look at through 2018 and code them wherever the methods fell. One of the things we had to think about was achieving inter-rater reliability in our coding schema. So we began by independently coding 10 articles chosen at random. We then compared the codes we individually assigned to the articles to determine the rate of agreement in code assignment and identify any potential need to calibrate our coding. What we found was that all three of us were coding at a rate of 94% agreement, so we felt that was sufficient to demonstrate inter-rater reliability. In the next round of coding, we put all of the articles into in vivo and then identified two child nodes, which was standalone and embedded methods. So what this means is we started to see the methods falling into two categories if they were there. So standalone methods is when there was an actual methods section in the article that explicitly went through the methods that were used, whereas embedded methods was any point throughout the article where methods fell. So it might be the author touching back on parts of the project or just getting into methods at various points in their article. We then looked at coverage, so we calculated the coverage of methods within each article. And we also noted some differences in coverage between standalone and embedded methods, which we'll get into in the analysis section. The last thing we looked at was word frequency. So we calculated the most frequently used words in each article so that we would then later be able to compare what the most frequent words were in methods that were either standalone or embedded. So the first journal that we looked at, the Journal of Technical Writing and Communication, we found that only 11% of the articles did not include any mention of methods, and that of all of those that did mention their methods, 56% were standalone methods and 33% were embedded methods.
Then we looked at the Journal of Business and Technical Communication. In this journal, there were 100% of the articles that had some form of methods representation. So we had 69% standalone method sections, and then we had embedded at 31%. For Technical Communication Quarterly, 30% of the articles had no methods mentioned at all. We had 50% at standalone, and then embedded was at 20%.
So, as Christine and Jessica just discussed, our initial analysis answered our first question that we were out to investigate, which was how are methods represented in published research. And so, as we can see, we were encouraged by the fact that in most articles there was good representation of methods, either be it standalone or embedded. Overall, it was an 84% methods representation across all three journals, regardless of type. So that was encouraging. And one thing that we hypothesized was that Technical Communication Quarterly may be publishing articles that are more highly theoretical that wouldn't lend themselves to a discussion of methods. But that is an element that, as we continue to develop this research, that we want to look more into. So we had answered effectively our first question about how methods are represented. And we also conducted a latent analysis of the most frequently used words in each child node at standalone and embedded to answer our second question, what functions do the methods section serve in published research? So the coverage percentage by itself is very interesting, 6.8% and 2.3% respectively between standalone and embedded. One might wonder how in-depth and detailed a representation of methods could actually be when it's only 2.3%. So that was interesting, which led us to wonder what are the functions and what are the most commonly occurring words that are being used in these two types of methods representation. And so as you can see, in standalone methods, we see words like participants, coding, using, students, and question. And embedded methods, we see words like research, rhetoric, communications, using, and code. And so on this next slide, what you see is the functions that standalone methods serve is really to draw a direct relationship between the data that's being collected and the conclusions by providing an extended discussion of data analysis techniques. That's one thing that we noticed, is that in standalone methods, the authors typically take the time to not only discuss the data that they're collecting and how they're collecting it and why they're collecting it, authors typically also spend a fair amount of time discussing the analysis tool that they used, or their reasons for conducting the analysis in the way that they did. And so this draws a direct line that Smagorinsky was calling for between the data itself and the methods. So these we were able to conclude that standalone methods help to establish credibility in the results and trustworthiness in the results that stand alone. Whereas at embedded methods, next slide, embedded methods, they do a very good job of also contextualizing the data collection. And so when in embedded methods, the most frequently used words do discuss the data that's being collected and how it's collected, but they more often than not also provide a lot of background information about the text or focus on the content of the study. They skip the step where they discuss the analysis techniques and their reasons for analysis. And so the relationship between the results and the data itself remains largely hidden because of that missing piece of analysis. And so we were able to conclude, at least in this initial study, that standalone methods are doing a better job of establishing that trust that Smagorinsky was calling for. And so our project to this point has, we feel, yielded interesting results, but it is as of yet incomplete. In the future, what we plan to do is to extend our research to include not just 1 but 10 years of research. We feel it's important to contribute to this conversation because Lisa Melancon and Kirk Sainamont called for more sustainability in their research. And for our field to be sustainable and viable, we have to be able to build on the research of others. And what we're trying to add to this conversation is that we can't, as a field and as a discipline, build on the research of others if the methods that are being used to conduct research aren't being discussed in ways that others can replicate or ways that establish trust in the results. And so this is where we plan to go from here, and we appreciate your time watching our video. Thank you so much.